I'm a 24-year-old male, and this happened to me a few years ago when I was around 21. I remember because it was shortly after my birthday in December. It was really cold outside and there was snow on the ground as we had just had a snowstorm pass through our area. I lived with my parents at the time, and my mom is not really a fan of driving in the snow, so she asked me if I could drive her to the gas station for her to pick up some cigarettes for her and my dad, as well as a few other items they might have needed. I said sure, as I wasn't really doing anything at the time, and I grabbed my keys, then following her to the car. I remember the cold air hitting your face pretty hard that night, so it had to be at least around the teens, which made the snow and whatever else was on the roads really slippery. This is important to know for later on in the story. The nearest gas station was about 5 minutes away from us, but given the conditions of the roads, it took us about 10 to get there. Once I was able to park the car, my mom got out of the car, then made her way inside the store. From where I was parked, I could see her inside the store standing in the line that was leading up to the register. I kept the car running as it was really cold and I just didn't want to be sitting in the car without any heat. I was browsing on my phone while waiting for my mom to get done, and right around that time I had seen her finally approach the register. There was a black truck that pulled up into the parking spot right next to my car. I found this a bit unusual given that the parking lot was empty, so there was really no reason for them to park right next to the spot where I was. But I kinda just chalked it up to them wanting to be as close to the entrance as they could, given how cold it was that night. No one got out of the car at first, but I didn't even notice this until I looked up to see my mom walking out of the entrance back to the car. I glanced over to the truck's passenger side window, and I could just make out a figure sitting in the passenger seat, and they were facing in my direction. My mom opened the door, then got inside, before then asking me what I was looking at. I told her about the truck pulling up well over a few minutes ago around the same time that she approached the register, but that nobody had gotten out. She first chalked it up to maybe they were just waiting for someone inside the store to come out, but when I mentioned seeing a figure in the passenger side of the car looking towards our direction, she then began to sense why I was so spooked out by it. She told me to just back out and get out of there, and that we didn't need to worry about them once we drove off. As soon as I put the car into reverse and then began to back up, the passenger door swung open and hit the side of my car. A tall, very built man stepped out from the car as soon as the door made contact with my car. I hit the brakes as soon as I felt the contact, and the man stood there before throwing his hands up at me and then staring in my direction. I didn't really know what to do as I'd never really been in any sort of accident before, and my mom was sitting right there next to me and could see as well as I had that the door had not been opened until we had already started moving. The man slowly walked up to my window and just stood there. I cracked it very slowly, and I told the man that I was sorry, but that I didn't see the door open as I was backing out. For a brief moment, he didn't really say anything. That is, before he simply asked,
"Roll down your window a little bit more. I can barely hear you."
I knew this couldn't be true as it was really quiet in that area, and I wasn't even speaking in a low tone. I told him that I'd prefer to keep it cracked as I really didn't want to let cold air get into the car. This really angered the man, and he immediately spoke in a more angered tone now. He was telling me to roll down my window yet again. I again told him no, and this is when things then took a turn for the absolute worse. Without any warning whatsoever, the man smacked my window really hard with his hand. Startled, I immediately jumped back and rolled the window up. My mom was right beside me, just absolutely yelling for me to just back out and leave. But I was really afraid of hitting the man in the process as he was still right next to my car. The man kept smacking my window really hard a few more times before he then tried punching it. It was right at this point where I realized that if I didn't get my mom and I out of there fast, this guy was definitely going to hurt us. I could see the cashier inside the gas station heard what was going on, and he looked to be on the phone with what I could only assume was the police. But there was absolutely no way I could wait for them as the man was now both punching at my window and now kicking my door. It was like some switch had then flipped on in this man's head and he had just totally lost it. I told my mom to hold on as I put the car into reverse again and backed out of there as fast as I could, just barely missing the guy by a few inches. I pulled fully out of the parking spot before the man ran out in front of our car and slammed his hands right on the hood. I sat there frozen, not knowing what to do, as the man looked right back at me. I turned the car wheel, then sped around him, trying to avoid him the best that I could before booking it the hell out of there. After that, I honestly thought that was the end of it. But as we made our way down the road to a stoplight, I was able to see headlights that was fast approaching from behind our car. And once it was close enough behind us, I could then see that it was the same truck the man was in. There appeared to be 2 people inside of it. I assumed the man I encountered must have been the passenger, and I guess the driver was someone I hadn't noticed before. I told my mom that it was them behind us, and she started to freak out and call my dad, then letting him know what was going on. We were still probably about 10 minutes away from our house given the road conditions, but I knew that there was no way that I could get us back to our house in that amount of time before these guys tried to ram us off the road, or whatever else they had planned for us. My dad told my mom for us to attempt to head back towards our house and that he would try and meet us halfway in his truck. She told me this, and I agreed that this had to be our best option, given that I couldn't turn around and head back to the gas station still not knowing if the police had even been called or not. So once the light turned green, I punched on the gas and sped off. I'm gonna be completely honest. I really wasn't being that cautious of the road at this point, as there really weren't any other cars at this point of the night. There were a few times where the car slid from the ice on the road, and I knew that it would only take one turn of the wheel to lose control, but I wasn't going to slow down and let these guys catch up to us. After about a few minutes of driving, we were able to see headlights right in front of us on the other side of the road. I was thinking that it had to be my father, and as we got a little closer, we were able to make out his truck beyond the lights. Very surprisingly, the truck was still behind us, still keeping pace with me given the road conditions. I could see my father cut across a midsection of the roads and then stop shortly off the side of the road. I started to slow down right as we approached and then pulled off to the side of the road, the truck still following me. As I came to a stop, the same man from before that was in the passenger seat hopped out of the car, then started making his way to our car. The driver opened his door, but before he could step out, both of the men stopped dead in their tracks at the sound of my father's voice. I suggest that both of you hop back in that car and drive right on out of here before I put a bullet in the both of you. I could see my dad walking out into the light, radiating from both his and my headlights. He had his 9mm pistol pulled and aimed right at the man's head as he stood right next to my car. I pretty much just watched as both of the men just stood there for a brief moment as my dad slowly inched his way towards them. The man then very slowly backed away towards his truck before then speaking to what I assumed was my father.
"You're really lucky you got here when you did."
The man laughed and jumped back into his truck before it quickly backed out and drove off in the other direction. My dad walked to my window and he asked me and my mom if we were okay. I remember telling him that other than being scared shitless, I think we were fine. Shortly afterwards, my dad followed us back home just to make sure no one else followed us. I really have no idea what those men's intentions were or why the man acted the way he did. All I know is that if I hadn't reacted how I did to get my mom and I out of there, I just really hate to think what those men would have done to us. For some context, I'm a 22-year-old female, and at the time I was 18 years old. I had moved to the nearest city from my hometown about 2 hours away to go to community college. I was going to get a degree in fine arts. I lived in a relatively really big dorm with 3 other roommates who were also female. The dorms happened to be located in the back of the college near downtown, situated behind a steakhouse, nightclub, and a gas station. The area was sort of in a seedy part of the city, so I tended to be a little cautious whenever I went, especially at night. One of those nights I had been craving some junk foods and I wanted to grab some snacks to eat while I was watching a movie, so I decided to head out to the nearby gas station. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and then my phone, then told my roommates where I was going. I was really close by, so I was able to walk to it whenever I wanted to. Though I would typically avoid it at night since it really sent off some really creepy vibes. When I finally arrived there, I opened the door, then went inside. It was pretty quiet, save for one guy who was hanging out near the liquor in the back. The girl at the counter seemed to be scrolling through her phone, seeing as she didn't really have much to do. So I went ahead and started looking at things I wanted to buy. Though, I gotta say, the closer I got to the back, the more that I could hear this sort of muttering. The guy who I had seen entering the store seemed to just be muttering absolute nonsense to himself. It wasn't that quiet, so I wasn't able to make out what he was saying. I didn't really think too much of it, and I just went back to what I was doing. A few minutes had passed, and as I was still shopping, the dude who I had seen in the back suddenly started yelling now. Just absolutely shouting random incomprehensible things. Every single second that went by, he seemed to get angrier. The man was pacing and he was waving his arms around. I was pretty much just standing there glued to the spot, absolutely terrified of this man. I didn't know what to do, and I wasn't sure if this guy was drunk, high, or just crazy. The girl at the cash register seemed to have been alerted to his presence as well. We had made eye contact and she looked just as terrified as I did. We both just watched as this man then ranted, raved, and began to pace around the store. I was unsure if I should call the police or not. I was trying to be quiet as to not alert him of my presence, as I just really didn't know what he was capable of. Another few minutes went by, and this guy then started yelling and screaming until he then walked up to the front, kicked over a few things, then left the store. I watched the guy then disappear right into the night, my heart now hammering in my chest. I had genuinely thought that I was going to get attacked by this crazy man. Thankfully, he left though without causing too much damage. I walked up to the poor frightened cashier and paid for my stuff. I also ended up giving her some extra cash because I felt really bad. I mean, I know she wasn't getting paid enough to deal with people like that crazy ass man, so I just wanted to help her out. That's pretty much the end of my story though. I don't know what happened with the man, and I don't know if he ever returned to the gas station, but I'm just really hoping that I don't encounter him again.
When I was 18 or 19, I decided to go metal detecting this park that was in the heart of the ghetto. Saying that this place is in a bad part of town too is really an understatement. There are regular shootings that occur at it, and the parking lot around the area is filled to the brim with dirty needles. And maybe I was stupid for detecting at this location, but I guess I just didn't care. I mean, I'd previously hit the spot and helped this old bum find a missing piece from his bicycle. But anyway, when I went here this time, it was like 4:30 in the morning. I drank like 8 cups of coffee and had this beat-up, rusty 1980s bounty hunter metal detector that my grandpa got at Radio Shack and left to me when he passed away. And I started on one side of the field and began moving across it in a sort of Rust-a-Scan sort of pattern. I found mainly just Corona caps, pennies, and sprinkler parts at the end, but I was at about the middle of the field and got a hit that seemed like it could have been a dollar coin or a ring or something, so I started digging it. I dropped my detector on the grass and pulled out this really big knife that I had to start cutting a plug, and as I was digging, I sort of looked around me every few minutes to keep a good view of my surroundings. At one moment, I looked behind me and noticed that this older, heavy-set black dude sort of looked a bit like Wesley Willis, who was super far away from me, was starting to get a bit closer. I assumed that he was just a guy at the park, so I kept digging, but kept my eyes on him. It's worth noting too that he couldn't have seen my knife from the angle that he was at, just my detector and bag of findings. He started getting closer and closer to me, and I got really suspicious at this point. I started wondering what his deal was, and I don't think that he saw I noticed him, because just then, he started charging me, like running full force towards me as fast as he could, with his eyes aimed at my gear. I stood up as fast as I could, and he saw my knife, and immediately yelled, "Oh man, I didn't mean any trouble. I'm sorry, man," and then just ran away super fast. To be honest, I was more confused by the situation than startled, I guess, but I still got out of there pretty quickly, because that after a little bit of reflection, could have been a very close call. Years ago, I moved to follow my boyfriend and to do a PhD in his country. I won't name the place, but it's an across-the-ocean type of deal. At first, I was very excited. It was a wonderful adventure. That is, until it wasn't. It's hard to describe the complexity of what I felt. I felt alone, misunderstood, far from my family and friends, and even though my boyfriend is wonderful, I really felt the weight of not finding any human connection. This could explain why I acted so weird and disconnected from reality in the following story. I'm also a very naive woman, and I like to see the best in people around me. This has been problematic more than a few times, but this story is maybe the worst example of where this candid attitude got me. So my boyfriend and I, we're into BDSM. We do it alone, on our own, and do not participate in events or anything. I do have an account on an own website. I go there to find new ideas for our sessions, and I sometimes, but rarely, post pictures. No face, no tattoos, nothing like that. I get contacted by interested DOMs once in a while, even though I clearly state that I'm not free. Usually they send copy-paste messages, so I just ignore them. Once in a while, though, I'd get a more, personal message and make an effort to answer that I'm definitely not interested and that I'm in a relationship. And this is how my discussion with him started. He didn't approach me with, will you be my sub, but with curiosity about how I got into BDSM, stating that he was quite new to the domain and was interested in understanding the way of life. So, I gladly explained. Explanations turned into discussions, and he told me about how he was in the police and that he investigated drug cartels. He also told me that he was married and that he had kids. Interestingly, we had a lot of hobbies in common too, a lot. I won't go into details about those hobbies, but they're kind of specific. And feeling very lonely, combined with the fact that I felt like I could trust him because he was married and had kids, I accepted his invitation to start texting on WhatsApp. I want to be clear that my boyfriend knew about this from day one too. Plus, we had been talking on this website for almost 3 months before switching to WhatsApp. He was very friendly and interested by my day-to-day life. He'd share pictures of his kids and of investigations that he was working on. This went on for another 3 months too. Then, one day, he told me that he had to do an interview of a suspect close to the town where I lived and asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, and we met for the first time. But before anyone panics, my boyfriend was hiking with friends for a few weeks. I texted him, but he didn't have a signal. Plus, we have a very trusting relationship. He has a lot of girlfriends, and back in my country, I hung out with a lot of boys. So this really isn't weird for us. But anyway, back to this first encounter. It felt as if we had known each other for years, to be honest. We had a great time from the beginning, and I was so happy that I'd found a friend far from my country, and he knew that I loved reading thrillers and enjoyed murder investigation videos, so he showed me his gear. Handcuffs, sampling kits for small investigations, other restraints, etc. It didn't feel weird at that moment, but afterwards, I kind of understood that this could have been a way for him to show off what he could do. However, as the night went on, after grabbing drinks from a nearby bar, he forced me against a wall and kissed me. I was shocked, really, and barely managed to push him off me. I told him that it was completely inappropriate, that he was married, and that I was in a relationship. He was really sorry and felt ashamed. He told me that he felt that there was something between us, and I was like, yeah, it's called friendship. I was disappointed, to say the least, and we parted ways. Days later, after he apologized over and over again, he called me to meet up. He wanted to take me for a ride in his hometown. It's a pretty place. He's got a bike, and he wants me to enjoy the scenery in his country that I barely know. And I agree. It is his hometown. He works there. He lives there with his wife and kids. Surely I'll be okay. In short, I wasn't. Again, he kissed me, tried to push for more, in the middle of a park, mind you, a park where he brought his children to play on the weekends. So I told him to bring me back to the bus station so I could leave. He did, and then proceeded to tell me a story about how he had recently got a drug seller out of hiding by modifying text messages sent by his girlfriend. He basically made him believe that she was cheating on him to get him to confront her and then arrested him. I don't know if it was true, I don't even know if it's possible, but due to what had just happened, what I heard was, I can make your boyfriend believe that you're cheating on him. And my boyfriend was still on his hike by that time. We did talk once every few days, and I told him everything about the moment that he had some cell signal. Meanwhile, I was confronting this guy about that. His behavior was really strange as he went from, "I'm sorry, I think I'm in love with you," to, "If you tell the cops, who do you think they'll believe? Their colleague or an immigrant?" I got scared and tried to cool things down with him. I just felt that he could go crazy at any moment. He clearly wasn't used to girls refusing him. At that point, I thought that it would be safer for me and my boyfriend to maintain contact with this guy, albeit with less enthusiasm than before. But after understanding how obsessed he was, I blocked him from all platforms where I knew that he had an account. But he found me. He even sent me my address, asking if I'd loved living in that particular part of town, and I never gave him my address. I guess that he could pull some strings at the station to get my info. He even came to visit me at my job at one point. I was so scared that I just played it as if everything was okay. I told him my boyfriend wanted me to cut ties with him because he was angry about what had happened, which was true, but I also wanted him out of my life. I didn't know how he would react if I told him, however. This guy insisted that I loved him, though, that I could be his mistress, that my boyfriend didn't have to know. He was obsessed by me, and he didn't hide it anymore. He told me that he wanted to have me, how we'd be a great couple, how he'd father our children. He went from "I'll be husband" material to, like, a serial sex offender too in a matter of seconds. I refused again and again, blocking him, changing my accounts, you name it. I got scared, though, when I got calls from unknown numbers. I was terrified when I saw anyone slowing down on a motorcycle close to my apartment. I was wary of going outside and going to my job. The quarantine was actually pretty welcome for me, really, and I didn't get any news from him for months. And then I broke my cell phone, and I knew that I could transfer all of my numbers from one phone to another, but I didn't know that it would unblock previously blocked numbers. Days later, I got a message from him. He told me that he had divorced his wife, that he still loved me, that he wanted to marry me. He apologized for making me believe that I was only mistress material and that I was worth so much more. He said my boyfriend didn't love me, that I deserved better, that he was waiting for me. When he saw that I saw his message, he said, "Finally, I thought you'd never unblock me." So, does this mean that he'd been sending this message over and over again in hopes that I'd finally see it? This narcissistic man used all of the manipulation tactics that he knew. He had told me, before we met in person, how he had learned those skills to toy with criminals, to have them tell the truth and admit crimes. Fortunately, I had dated manipulative men before and knew the signs. Basically, he wasn't used to not getting what he wanted. He was attractive, rich, interesting, and he knew that. I blocked him again, and we moved a few months later, and I just hope that he doesn't get his hand on this information. I believe that his last move was trying to hack into my Instagram, as I got a notification that someone from his hometown had tried to connect to my account. This obsessed cop who has chased me for over a year now, it's terrifying, to say the least.